What's that?
Do you do a transcript of this?
Oh, we actually post the video online. Yeah, we don't do a transcript. But
Thanks.
yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Is there a microphone?
There's not.
Oh. Talk loud. I've never talked to one of those before. Thank you all for coming. I'm Tom Schweich, State Auditor. I wanted to introduce to you some of the people who are here with me tonight. Vanessa Chandler, my Director of Communications. She's there to help with any media. Chris Vetter, CPA and the Audit Manager for the St. Louis area. And Carl Zilch, who is the auditor in charge of this particular audit. Wanted to talk a little bit about the meeting structure and how I view audits, and then I'll go very specifically into the findings, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions you might have. Our audit process, and the reason I do an audit is very simple. My job is to determine whether people spending public resources acted in compliance with law and regulation in the Missouri Constitution. That's the first thing we look at. The second thing we look at is whether they acted in accordance with sound financial practices and accounting principles. That's what we do. I know that there's been a lot of turmoil in this district over the last few months. Some of it's political, some of it's financial. I do not focus on the politics. I'm not interested in settling political scores, and I'm not interested in taking sides in any political battles. I'm interested in making sure that the Monarch Fire District is conducted itself in accordance with law and sound accounting practices, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. You live in an amazing community. I don't live too far from here, but Chesterfield, Wildwood, and the other areas encompassed by this district are among the most prosperous and interesting areas of our state. I love going to eat at Annie Gunn's. I used to run the St. Louis County Air Show right out here at Chesterfield, at the Spirit of St. Louis Airport. So I know the area very well, and it's one of the most affluent, diverse, and interesting areas of the state. And so I hope that what I do tonight will remind you of what a great community you live in. I will point out some deficiencies in the way this fire district is run. I hope that everybody will commit then to correcting those deficiencies, and that we can move on and put some of the turmoil and tragedy and problems behind us and move forward in running this district in a fair and appropriate manner. And that's all I'm here to do, is talk about those issues. This audit was instituted in an unusual fashion. Normally, I have either a statutory or legal requirement to conduct an audit, which we do every 2 or 3 or 4 years, or we do audits by petition of the voters. This was a unique situation where Governor Nixon actually ordered me to do the audit. That doesn't happen very often. It's the only one. I've been auditor now for a little over a year. It's the only governor order audit that we've had. And it was done because a request first came into my predecessor and then to me, and I wrote the governor and said a lot of people want this audit to be done, and he ordered that I do it. The period that we audited was the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2010. We usually do the previous fiscal year, but we did look at issues that followed that, which is our normal practice. And we spent 900 hours on this audit at a cost of $36,500, which will be borne by the governor and his office. We've already billed that amount, and that's how it will be paid. There were a lot of allegations made relative to the way the finances of this district are being managed. We did look into all of them. You will not find all of them addressed in the audit report. Our audit reports, by definition, only address where we found a concern that we thought needed to be reported on. That doesn't mean we ignored some of the allegations that were made. It means that we looked at them and either found there was no merit to them, or they were so minor that we shouldn't report them, or there was no evidence supporting them. When I started auditing, I instituted something that's never been done before, which is a grading system. I found that subjects of audits, just like students, are more responsive if they're going to be graded. And so we put in a process whereby we give the subject of every audit either an excellent, which is kind of like an A if you're a teacher, you know, a good, a fair, or a poor. Our rating for Monarch Fire District was fair. It was kind of like a C. We've seen worse. We've been around and we've seen situations where we've given out a lot of poors, where entities were very badly mismanaged, where there were severe financial problems. What we found here was a series of problems that we think are all correctable if the recommendations are implemented. And the good news is that the current board that has run this district, that is running this district now, has committed to implement the recommendations that we made. So with that, I will start into actually what we found. And you can see, you can follow in your audit report. I'm just going to follow through in the same order that they are in the actual report that you have. Number one, retirement incentives. We did have some concerns with the retirement package that was offered to the first 7 employees who accepted. It included years of service, compensation, and very generous vacation accrual and health benefits, much more than normally offered. There was $231,000 offered in additional compensation to those people who took that. Under Article 3, Section 39 of the Missouri Constitution, you are not allowed to grant extra compensation to public employees for services already rendered. And this appears to us to be in violation of that, and we audit a lot of these districts, and this is an unusual arrangement that appears to be in violation of the Missouri Constitution. In the present case, the first employee signed up received $2,000 extra per year of service. The other 6 received $1,500 extra per year of service. They were paid vacation and sick leave in full, which would not normally occur for a retiring employee, and they were given a health benefit that could cost up to $280,000 for 5 years. Now, I have nothing against giving people rewards for what they've done, but I have to recommend what is the law and the Constitution. And this package appeared to us, if you add it all up, it's over $500,000 in incentives and compensation for services already rendered. And under our interpretation, which we have followed for a long time, for many years, this would be a violation of the Missouri Constitution and inappropriate. The response of the district was that they were advised by legal counsel that it was okay, and that's fine. They can have that opinion, but I can tell you we do a lot of audits in a lot of districts and a lot of cities, and this is not proper. That's our view of it, and we believe that it was not properly occurred, and it's costing the district $500,000. Number two, our second finding was relative to legal expenses and other expenditures that we found to be questionable. Let's start with legal services. The district hires various law firms based on specialized services needed, and that's a good thing. You want to have a general counsel that gives you general legal advice, and if you have a particular employment issue, you're going to want to have employment counsel. If you have a benefits issue, you're going to want to have benefits counsel. And it's perfectly appropriate for a district like this to hire multiple lawyers for these issues, and we find this around the state. This is a very common and completely proper and appropriate practice. However, what happened here was there were lawyers who were hired for many, many years without any sort of solicitation, competitive bidding, looking to see if maybe other people might charge a lower rate. That was the first problem we had. In 2010, there was $212,000 spent on legal fees. That's a lot for a fire district. And we found that in many cases there were no solicitation of bids for the general counsel and for the pension and personnel legal counsel, sometimes for several years. Now, in the old days, I was actually a lawyer in private practice before you all elected me as your state auditor. And when I first started in 1985 as a lawyer, you did have, in the private sector, for example, companies that would use the same lawyer for years and years and years and never competed out. But I can tell you in the last 5 years of my legal practice, even for companies that I won 10 cases in a row for, there was always a price competition for a major case. That's the way it works now. You do compete these things out to make sure you get the lowest price for your legal services, and that's not occurring here. You're sort of using the old model, the 80s model of legal services, rather than the 2011, 2012 model of legal services, and we recommend that there be competition. The other thing we found, which would even have been a problem in 1985, is there were no written agreements for some of these legal services. There was not even a list of what rate the fire district was going to be charged for those legal services. That's never appropriate, and in fact, under Missouri Statute 432070, contracts for political subdivisions have to be in writing. And in this case, many of those contracts were not in writing, and in some cases, we couldn't even really get what the rate for the legal services was. So that's highly problematic to us. We do know that the pension attorney was overpaid because there was some evidence of what he was supposed to charge by $4,300 in one case. I think that has been rectified, but that demonstrates what happens when you don't have price competition and when you don't have written contracts for legal services. So we believe that there needs to be a change in the way those legal services are procured, the way they're documented. There needs to be contracts. People need to see. Bills need to be itemized. They need to say what the services were for, and there needs to be a cross-check to make sure that the amounts paid were actually what was legally authorized. But that's a pretty serious finding in this case, and there has been a commitment to change that practice. I'm not saying you got bad legal advice. From all I can tell, you got good legal advice. What I'm talking about is whether you got the best price for that legal advice, and there should be some price competition. That's the way things work these days, and there needs to be, by law, written contracts for those legal services. Finding 2.2 relates to an awards banquet. We were concerned about $26,000 spent on a service awards banquet in September 2011. There were awards based on service milestones, cost $16,000, conference room and dinner $5,000, guest speaker $2,000, attendance prizes $2,000, even $500 for a photographer. Now, again, I think you do have to build employee morale. We don't, you know, it's tough working for government. Sometimes you don't get the things, perks you get in the private sector. But in a fire district of this size, based on our experience, $26,000 for a party is too much money. And we think that that was a waste of taxpayer resources, at least to some extent. Now, we're not saying there shouldn't have been any event. We're saying that based on our experience and our accounting practices that we look at, that was too much money in this particular case. We also found some problems with expenditure reviews. That's section 2.3 of your audit. We believe the district needs to improve its expenditure review and approval procedures. For example, the pension attorney was paid $2,130 twice for the same services, and that's different than the $4,300 overcharge I talked about earlier, because there wasn't careful monitoring the bills. People didn't know which bills had been paid and which bills hadn't been paid. The district inadvertently paid $1,200 for cleaning supplies. They paid to the wrong vendor. The invoice got attached to a purchase order it shouldn't have been attached to. And we also found that the district did not require adequate documentation in support of some of its expenditures, making it difficult to determine if they actually got the services that they paid for. The lobbyist contract for the district. And by the way, I don't have a problem with the district having a lobbyist. There's legislation that's of importance to the firefighting community. They can have a lobbyist if they want. That's okay. It's your all decision whether to do that. But the contract does not require submission of written reports. The invoices don't provide details of what services were rendered. In 2012, when you hire a lawyer or a lobbyist or an outside vendor or contractor, you get documentation for what they did to make sure you got value for how much you paid. There were substantial amounts of money paid to this lobbyist. That might have been money well spent. I certainly see your all's lobbyists in the halls of the Capitol, so I know they're there doing work for you all. But the bill doesn't say what they did, what for, how much it cost, anything like that. So that needs to be improved. So our recommendation relative to services is very simple. The district needs to periodically solicit proposals for legal services, maintain selection documentation, and enter written agreements. That's just contracts and 101 is what that is. And I think that the district is committed to do that, and that's the good news. We also have to ensure that all expenditures are necessary and documented. Make sure that you don't pay the same person twice, and everything is very carefully documented. The response, again, from the district from this was positive. And, we don't always get positive responses. Sometimes people get very defensive and say we don't want to do it. In this case, they've agreed that the recommendations we made were valid and that they will implement those recommendations. Let me talk about finding number 3. That's section 3.1 of your audit. This is a problem. Closing meetings is denying the public access to information. And as an auditor, part of my job is to ensure that the public has the legal access to the information it's required to have. In this case, we found that the district did not document the reasons or the votes for going into closed session on 40 different occasions from January 2010 to September 2011. Again, violations of the Sunshine Law and the open meetings laws are common among subjects of audits, but I have not done an audit where we found that many violations, so that's a problem. Now, there could have been a perfectly legitimate reason for going into closed session. When sensitive personnel matters are discussed, it's absolutely fine to go into closed session because you don't want to talk about people's health problems and things like that. And the law recognizes a certain zone of privacy for employees when they're discussed by the board, which is okay. But the law also allows you as the citizen to judge whether there should have been a closed session. And there needs to be documentation as to why there was a closed session. And in this case, we found that documentation woefully inadequate. And the media will jump all over that. The media is very interested in what's going on in Monarch. And when they see that there's 40 sessions closed without adequate documentation, immediately there are suspicions that maybe something inappropriate was going on. We did not find anything inappropriate, although when we questioned them on some of the reasons for closing, it was questionable. We don't think anything devious was happening, but we do think some of the closed meetings probably should have been open to you all to listen to what was going on. One other thing that we find helps the public judge whether sunshine activity is proper, whether meetings are properly closed, is to keep a log. just to keep a simple log of when meetings are closed and why, and we did not have a log in this case. And we've asked the district to keep a log so that you all have access to that log and can see if these meetings were properly or improperly closed. So our recommendation, again, based on the findings of the audit, would be simple. Ensure a roll call vote to close meetings and reasons for going to closed session are documented in open meeting minutes that you all can read, so you know if they're acting properly and in accordance with law. And the district has said they will implement that recommendation. They've been very clear about that. Maintain a public request log, and the district has said that they will do that as well. It's very important that the public have access to what's going on here, and I think now you will have the access that you require. Finding number 4 in the audit is a salary survey. Some of the complaints we got were that the salaries were out of line. And with respect to the firefighters, the day-to-day firefighters, there had been a salary survey done, and it did not appear to us that the salaries were out of line. However, with respect to management, some of the senior people, 18 senior administrative positions, there had not been a salary survey done in a long time, and we were not able to pass on whether the salaries were reasonable or not because the salary survey had not occurred. So while we did not have a problem with the day-to-day firefighters in this regard, we don't know if there's a problem with respect to management, and we expect a salary survey to occur and resolve that issue. So our recommendation, again, based on the finding, it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say, is that the district has to conduct a salary survey, a district similar in size, and perform an additional analysis of salaries. And the response we got was exactly the response we wanted, and we commend the board for that, which is we will do that. That's what we like to hear, and that will be done. Finding number 5 is an important finding also. It's bank reconciliations. It's very important for you all to know how much money you have in the bank, and that there be a reconciliation. A reconciliation means you look, it's just like you all do, you write a check, you balance your checkbook, then the bank sends you a statement at the end of the month, and you make sure that the amount in your checkbook is the same as the amount in the bank. Well, we found at January 31st, there was a $266,000 discrepancy between those two numbers, and that's highly problematic. The good news is that 6 months later, after repeated inquiries by our office, the determination was made that most of this difference was made from mistakes during an accounting system conversion which occurred in January of 2011. And by the way, to give some credit to the district, accounting system conversions are a nightmare. Almost any time we audit an accounting system conversion, it's difficult and there are problems. But what you need to do is reconcile it. And so after we brought this, Carl and others brought this to the attention of the district, they did do a reconciliation. And at this point, there's only $2,200 we can't account for now. That's still bad, though. We want to know what happened to those $2,200. I have no evidence there was any fraud or embezzlement, and I want to make that clear here. But what I do know is that last year, when I found accounting discrepancies around the state in various audits, we ended up finding over $700,000 in embezzled and stolen money when people weren't reconciling their bank accounts. So when you don't reconcile your bank accounts, there is an opportunity for people to take money, and while we do not believe it happened here, it can happen, and I saw it to the tune of $700,000 around the state when people were not reconciling their bank accounts properly. That provides the opportunity for fraud and theft. So we are asking that that be corrected. We also found some smaller discrepancies than the $266,000 or the $2,200. At April 30, 2011, the payroll outstanding checklist was $750 greater than the amount posted in the general account. At May 31, 2011, the reconciled book balance for the ambulance account exceeded the bank balance by $300. Again, not a big amount, but it shows a little sloppiness, and these amounts have to be reconciled. You all balance your checkbook every month. You want it to come out exactly right. We expect the fire district to do the same thing. But again, no evidence of embezzlement. That's the good news, because I do sometimes have to tell people that people are stealing from them. No evidence of that. Just a need to tighten up the way money is handled so you all can make sure that there's no theft or fraud going on in the district. The audit response was very simple. We are fully implementing the recommendation. We will be reconciling our bank accounts more carefully. I think you can be happy and assured that this will not occur in the future. Finding number 6 in the audit, the district needs to improve procedures for records and property. Capital assets. The district has not performed an annual physical inventory for several years. Now, I recently released an audit of the Kansas City Public Schools. They also have not done adequate inventories. We ended up not being able to find $2.2 million worth of computers, iPads, all those things. I mean, when you don't perform a physical inventory, when there's no risk of being caught, people take stuff. People do it all the time. We couldn't find over $2 million worth of property in Kansas City. So it's very, very important that physical assets are inventory. Everything from this podium to computers, to chairs, to tables, to microwaves, whatever, they need to be inventoried to make sure people aren't just walking off with them. Because if people know there's no inventory being taken, They take the stuff. It's unfortunate, part of humanity, but again, we see it all the time. And I've seen millions of dollars worth of stuff that have been lifted out of various public entities when there weren't accurate inventories taken. So we asked that that be correct now. Fuel and mileage logs. Gasoline is probably going to hit $5 an ounce. I was reading $5 a gallon. I was maybe $5 an ounce. I don't know. $5 a gallon pretty soon. And you know what? That's a strong incentive for people just to take fuel. And fire districts use a lot of fuel. And we found that the district did not maintain fuel logs for bulk fuel tanks, making it very difficult to ensure that district fuel is used only for district purposes. There were no logs of fuels pumped from the tanks and logs of fuels pumped into fire trucks and ambulances, although it was maintained for other district vehicles. Vehicle logs lacked adequate detail and were not reviewed. Some vehicle logs did not contain mileage information or a description of the use of the vehicles. No one periodically reviewed vehicle logs or calculated the miles per gallon to make sure that the gas was being used for district purposes and not personal purposes. And I did an audit not too long ago in this area where it became pretty evident to us that someone was just taking gas and using it for their personal purposes because the amount of gas they were using far exceeded anything they would need. So that's what these logs tell us, whether people are using the gas for personal purposes or whether they're really using it to advance the business of the district. In this case, we can't tell because the logs are not accurate. We also found that fuel cards were used, but the entries on the odometer readings were not correct. When you use a fuel card, you're supposed to say what the odometer reading was, again, so you can track whether the fuel cards were properly expended, and that was not documented either. Our recommendation, you can probably tell me what the recommendation is. It's pretty obvious from what I just said. Ensure complete and detailed capital asset records are maintained. Annual physical inventories are conducted and compared to those detailed records, and proper approvals obtained for disposal of assets. Ensure that records are maintained for all bulk fuel tanks. Total fuel pumped is reconciled to fuel purchases and fuel on hand, and any differences are investigated. And make sure that mileage and usage logs are properly handled so we can see how the gas is being used. It's a very expensive commodity, particularly in a fire district. The good news is, again, and I have to compliment the board here, they didn't say, hey, we don't care, we're doing it right. They said that we're reviewing this process, and we're going to develop a plan to ensure that all fuel expenditures are proper and all capital assets are properly accounted for. So I think there's good news for you all who wanted this audit because you're going to get results. And by the way, I do a 90-day follow-up. I'll be back to make sure they're doing it, and I'll issue a follow-up report on that. That's the summary of the things we found wrong. I know there were other issues that were raised, and I said I don't get involved in the politics. What I'm telling you is these are concrete, tangible ways to improve the financial efficiency of your district. They were, some of the problems, fairly serious. There is a commitment on the part of your board to correct those problems. We will be back to make sure the problems are corrected. And what I'm hoping people can do, because I do know this particular fire district has been plagued by tragedy and conflict, that you will take these recommendations in the constructive spirit that they're offered, make the corrections, try to put your differences aside, and recognize what a gem of a community you really have. Because that's really the best part about Chesterfield and Wildwood in these areas, is they're some of the most prosperous and interesting parts of the state. And it makes me sad to see all the conflict that I read about in the paper that's going on, when really all you got to do is fix these problems and you'll have a pretty well-run district. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Yes?
When was the last audit done with your office here?
I've only been in office for a year, so I don't know the last time we did the Monarch District. Does anybody know?
I don't think we've
We haven't ever done an audit.
We don't
of
have
this district.
anything.
We have no independent authority to audit this district. It has to be either by a petition or an order of the governor. And what they're telling me is that's never happened before. Yes?
The first thing you're supposed to do in an audit is to identify and to evaluate the internal controls. And based on a fair evaluation or rating, whatever, is that a determination that there are major weaknesses in the internal controls?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what the bank reconciliation part of my presentation was about, the internal controls of the money. And there were some weaknesses in there. There was not adequate reconciliation, and there were some problems with the conversion of the accounting system. So we give the internal controls a fair rating. Yes, that's correct. Other questions? Yes.
I believe you said that the level of compensation for firefighters were not out of line. Does that mean that there are comparable districts in this metropolitan area or in the state of Missouri that would pay about the same thing?
Yeah.
That,
and you know, we don't comment on what somebody should be paid. We just make sure that it's in line with what other people are paid in the same area. And yeah, it is. But what did not happen was for upper management, there was not comparable analysis done. Other questions?
Mr. Schweich, I
Yes.
wonder if you could speak to the fact that in the first 6 months, because of this audit, I did look back, I'm currently the treasurer. First 6 months of 2011, our legal expenditures for general counsel averaged just under $1,954 a month. After we put this out to bid, the last 4 months with a different attorney, we were averaging more than $6,000 a month. So it would seem that while we do now have a signed document that stipulates legal fees, that it is in no way saving us money. And
That's a
in fact,
ridiculous comment. That's ridiculous. It depends on what services you need. The idea that competition reduces fees increases fees is ridiculous. I don't know what you needed the lawyer for in the last 6 months, but there's no way I'm going to back off the idea that the only responsible way to handle legal fees is to compete it out and get the lowest bidder who's competent.
And actually,
Other
may I-
questions? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. I've enjoyed being here. Thanks very much.
We didn't take the ones here.
Appreciate you being here.
He answered your question. He's trying.
I'll be right there.
They are, at least they
So he's basically saying get the lower bid. It was that's how I
Try to make it so I can hear. I don't hear so well.
I go crazy.
So with the one thing, we're not gonna cash it, probably with another thing. See our better stuff.
Thanks. Hey, it was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'll look forward to hearing something when we get some
when we get to it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we just had
The text is clear. He's right, it's not.
$36,000 built in budget. Okay.
My favorite.
Have a good evening.
So I just want to get your reaction.
I was like, are you really gonna? Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Or maybe just.
that's wide open. I don't even think it's, I don't even, it's just my mouth wide open. Yeah, that's what I had. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. You ready?
Nice to meet you. Take care.
You would say banquet is seemingly, I think because it's easy to understand, sort of getting a lot of attention in terms of how much money they operate. What are your thoughts on that?
Substance.
If that was happening at the time.
Yeah, no substance.
So the board has passed through to discuss findings. Basically, said some changes.
Not to have any orange
In terms of
On one, yeah.
hoping to put differences aside, what's your feeling on that in terms of running more district? I've been here a couple times, and we've seen that things tend to get a little contentious. That sort of, what is your thought on moving forward with it? Because I guess advice, I mean, you basically said. We haven't talked about improving that.
I appreciate that, sir. Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what, and that's, no, I mean, that's one of the things that we're gonna do is, survey.
Yeah.
The lowest cost.
I know.
Yeah,
But
that's.
did it seem they were
Service.
maybe 1.5?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know anything.